Alright, peace. I'm with Rene, and today we are going to do an introduction on the Taino language. So first, what I want to start with, the Taino, the word Taino, right? Just such as the word Aztec, is used to describe a general archaeological term of a community of peoples. So let's first elaborate on that so people can understand what we are talking about.
On the word Taino?
Yeah.
That's, in my opinion, that's kind of controversial, and because nobody really knows if the word Taino was actually pronounced as Taino. You know what I mean? The first time as the word Taino being heard was by a guy named Constantine Raffinisk. I believe his name. He's a French guy. In his book, he says that they say Taino, and that was the first time. Ever since then, people started using that terminology,
Right.
Taino, describing them as a tribe name.
Right.
But nobody really knows if the Tainos actually call themselves Tainos.
Right.
So that's one thing that it's just not that the reason that the word Taino is being used is only to differentiate the indigenous people of the Caribbean and other indigenous people of the other rest of the other side of the world. You know.
Right.
Like when you hear, you're welcome. When you hear the word Locono, that's the people from South America.
Right.
You know, if you hear the word Carib, you already know that's the people from South America. If you hear the word Kalinago, those people from the Western Antilles.
Right.
Now, when you say Taino, you already know that's from Puerto Rico, Cuba.
Right.
So we're already used to that terminology, and that's
Right.
the reason that they use that, to this day.
Right.
It's just to differentiate us from the other tribes.
Right.
So people are used to it, But yeah, your thing is dying.
Yeah, so the next thing is, like in Taino, there are different, I guess I would say archaeological terms. Like you have the Macoris, the Siguayos, the Siboney, the Guanahatabe. You have the Carib or the Kalinago, the Iniri. The Kalinago and the Locono, like if you can get into that.
Yeah, the Macoris, they were another people from Dominican Republic. They spoke a different dialect to the Tainos, For example, they would use the word "twap" to describe the word, I think it's "twap" or "nose," one of those. I don't want to confuse Macoris with the Siguayo, but I think it was "twap" the Macoris said, or boys. But there's only a few words that was recorded by the Macoris. I believe it's boys. I forgot exactly what it means, and that's it. Nobody really knows. It wasn't really recorded by them, But the Siguayos, they spoke a word that's very similar to the Rogayans, because they would say the word gold was nase or nose. They mean gold. And the Lucayans would say nase simo, which means simo means yellow, and gold is nase, so it means yellow gold. So some people think that the Siboneyans and the Lucayans are the same people because of that word, But nobody really knows if they spoke Arawak or anything. They probably did. Nobody really knows because nobody never seen that word. There is no word in South America that can actually it's very similar to the Siguayo, only to the Tainos, So there's a possibility maybe it's from Central America, I think that the Siguayos have a very close relationship with Mesoamerica because of the word "twap," which means gold, right? I think it's Siguayo or Siboney. I don't want to confuse because they both start with a C. It's one of those two. But the "twap" means rock, and to the Dolan language they also say "twap."
Well, let's explain this because when the person that usually hears the word Taino, they usually think it's one language.
No.
Let's explain that. 'Cause I think people get confused.
No, it's the Taino language is a mixture of Arawak and Carib. and some words from Mesoamerica. And this is my opinion, as far as my understanding from tracing the words, some words. The Taino has I think that in DR they spoke Arawak, but they were full dialects, as you already said.
Okay, so just before you go further, so perhaps the broad term that is applied as Taino can represent a community of peoples that are multilingual
or trilingual.
Okay,
Trilingual.
you can explain that first.
What I mean by trilingual is like they will have Taino, they will have some words from Mesoamerica, and they will have words from Carib and Arawak. So that's what I'm saying by trilingual. You know, it's gonna be controversial if I say trilingual. People are gonna be like, oh, I disagree. You know what I mean? But it could be from Mesoamerica, Carib, and Arawak. You know, anybody knows the Haiti were very dominant in Puerto Rico too. You know, so they spoke an Arawak dialect. In DR, you have four dialects. So you have Taino, Macuris, as you say, but the language was kind of different in DR than in PR. You know, considering that in PR there was a lot of Caribs there too. So in PR we use a lot of Carib words too. I've been tracing a lot of words that have been going. Actually, we have most similarities with Kalinago. Kalinago is like mixed with Carib and Arawak. You know. But some words in Puerto Rico were actually loan words from Carib. You know? So yeah, it's very hard to trace in the Taino language which language comes from what, because the Tainos were, the scientific term is claudioscopic people.
Okay,
You know,
if you can explain.
Spectrum.
Okay.
What I mean is like a spectrum of different people. You know what I mean? If that's a better or lack of term, with a lot of different races. You know.
Okay.
Creating the Tainos.
Okay.
You know. So that's the thing that it's very complex. The language is very complex. Even for me, I get confused sometimes. But one thing I have to say when you're tracing Taino language, you have to be very careful, because sometimes the word might say Taino, but it's actually African. You know. So that's why every time I'm tracing the language, I really dig into it deep to see if it is a native word. You know. I give you a good example. You know Rafael Pido, I think you have his book.
Right.
In one of his books, he states that the word for Taino book is cachimbo.
Right.
And I thought myself, cachimbo, maybe you say it in Puerto Rico, it's a smoking pipe, you know? But it's not. It's actually an African word from the Timbuktu tribe from Brazil, which the Portuguese was having slaves from Africans, of course, and taking words from them and put it into language. So they'd say cachimbo too. It's actually an African word, you know. So you have to be really careful when tracing these languages, because they might sign Taino, but it's not, you know. And that's the only thing that I can say. But yeah, you know, in my opinion, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely see that, because the linguistics can be very diverse.
Diverse, yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it can be very diverse. You know, it's funny. It's like when you talk to a Dominican, right? In DR, for example, what they will use. I give you an example of George, what told me. Different meanings, you know. The word bicho, right? This is funny because he told me this. Bicho in Puerto Rico means something else. It's like a bad term. But it's a Taino word for worm. In DR, it means worm. In PR, it means something different. Something kind of, how can I say, very disrespectful. You know? So, when you go to PR and you say Daniel Beach, they're going to take it offensive. You know what I mean? So they don't make it work. You know, there's a different terminology. You know, but that's what I mean. You know? And like in DR, they would say different things for different terms. You know? For example, in Puerto Rico, we say sarucho or carucho for the shell when we eat the seafood. In DR, they use a Taino or Carib word, lambi. So there's always like, what is lambi? I don't know what that means. So whatever in Puerto Rico we use as a Spanish term, in DR you might use it as a native term. So whatever y'all using as a Spanish term, we might use it as a native term. So that's probably can actually be confusing, you know. But that's what I mean about, you know, the language and the confusion, you know, about that. Like, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, from my understanding, when it comes to the Taino language, like I will read that it's part Taino will be part of a family of Arawakan languages.
Yes, yeah.
You can explain that.
The Maprian Arawakan is different. It's a long branch. They come from the northern and South America. They call it Northern Maprian language. So you have the Wahido, the Tule Guarani. You have the Pia Poco. You have the Wapa, the Wanapoco. It's a lot of the Wahido language. So those are all Arawak speaking languages, and but they might speak like a different dialect. It's like Latin, French, and Spanish, It's all Latin, but they're just a different dialect, But that's what they mean about Arawakan, But because we might have long words from Wahido, we might have long words from the Tule Guarani language, If, for example, is a Locono, a good example is a Locono don't say Duhu in their language. They use a different name for bench,
Right.
Only the Wahido use Tulu.
Right.
They say Tulu.
Right.
So that's a loan word that's actually the Tainos actually took from them.
Right.
So that's a good example right there, So certain words that we took from different parts of the Arawakan branch tribes that we took from them as loan words, and maybe gave rise to the Tainos, especially, and then it's mixed with Mesoamerican and it's mixed with Carib, so it's very hard to trace which is what, It's very difficult.
Another thing I want to ask you is, what about for example, people usually say either Carib or Kalinago.
It's actually Kalinago.
Okay.
Carib,
if you can explain that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Carib was a Spanish term. The Spanish used Carib for everything. They will use it even for if a person didn't obey the orders, they call you a Carib. It's like you're a savage. They were even called, a good example in Philippines, you have these natives, they call them negritos, they like black. And they were the first aboriginals there. They actually called them black Caribs because they didn't want to follow the European, they didn't want to become civilized, if you want to use that term. So they were calling them black Caribs, So they would use Caribs for anybody who didn't obey the orders. The correct word is Kalinago. The Kalinagos always use that terminology. It was recorded by Brenton, it was recorded by the pirates who lived with them in the Cemeteries. They call them Kalinago. The Tainos call them Ganimba or Ganiba. Now that word Ganimba, the word cannibal comes from there. It's the Spanish to put the AL, which comes the word cannibal. They took that from the Taino terminology,
Right.
Ganimba.
Here's another example, right? Like with Garifuna, right? Sometimes I've seen that Garifuna is pronounced with a K, like Garifuna.
Yeah, they say with a Garifuna. Yeah, it's like what I noticed about, that's another difficult thing too. What I noticed about the Garifuna language is that they very same as the Kalinago. It's actually descended from Kalinagos. It's just that they would take certain words that was actually original word from Kalinago and use it differently. So they would try to stick with the original word because they were taken from the lesson cities and took into the Central America.
Right.
So they try to stick with that
Right.
tradition.
Right.
But the word or the language must have changed. Just like the Locono. Locono
Right.
language changed during times.
Right.
And that's the problem. The language changes,
Right.
And that's one thing that I noticed too about the Garifuna. They use, I'll give you an example. I think Kalinago, they say, we say Orogoti for grandfather. Kalinago say Arogoti. Garifuna say Arogoti too. But for another example is, in Kalinago, like Taino, we say ni Taino. Kalinago say ni Tion. And Garifuna, they say ni Duhen. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's very different, and it all means a relative or an ancestor, all that. So it's very difficult. I noticed that too. So it can be very confusing when you're tracing those two languages because the Garifuna kind of changed, the language kind of modified a little bit. It kind of maybe distanced themselves a little bit from
Maybe
Kalinago.
perhaps these interpretations for the meanings could have been altered due more in particular with the conquest in the islands.
Yeah, and another thing I think probably is that the Garifuna took a little bit of French and Dutch too as well, and that might have maybe changed it a little bit, as far as my understanding, But that's just the only thing that I can come up with. But yeah, it's kind of difficult. But the Garufunas, they are still, their language still exists to this day, and they speak it fluently. It's strictly native. You know, it's just amazing how they can stick to. The language hasn't extinct for almost 500, 600 years. You know, it could be even more. You know, it's just amazing. And it's according to Taylor Douglas, who actually studied the Kalinago, he said the language modified maybe 70% Arawak, maybe 16-20% or more Carib.
Yeah, now I know Keisha was saying something about percentages.
Yeah, she said she didn't agree with him. He doesn't know where he got that percentage from.
Right.
The reason he said it is because the men, when they do trades, the men had to do trades, not the women. So they had to speak Carib to the men when they tell them to do tradings.
Right.
But the women spoke Arawak with completely with other women.
Right.
So that language kind of stood.
Right.
And according to Taylor, he says that the men would stay with men. The women and the men, they slept different. They slept separately.
Right.
The women would sleep this way, the men would sleep that way. So the Carib kind of dominant, the Arawak kind of dominate.
Can that
Carib.
be similar to the creation account of the men being separated from the women in Bona's account?
You mean like Wanahona and Martinino?
Yeah.
That can be,
Yeah.
most definitely, yeah. What is interesting about that is that Martinino, which is the island with only women, I actually traced the word in Locono, which Martinino, which means fatherless.
Right.
It's interesting because Martinino, the island that only has women, there's no men. And in Locono, the word Martinino means fatherless.
Right.
You know, so you can see how that makes a lot of sense. And then when I'm telling you now that the Arawak, you know, the Arawak kind of dominate more of the male language. You know?
Right.
But yeah, you know, it's the Arawaks and I mean the Kalinago is maybe it's more Arawak, you know. That's why it's more so similar to the Taino language, you know, because of that, because of the Haiti, or you could call it the Inidi or the pre-Taino if you want to use that, you know. But yeah.
Yeah, so that's good. So to wrap this up, for someone that's just starting to get a good foundation, to get a grasp on learning the Taino language, where is a good start? I know there's Julian Cranberry, like
that's
people
what
reference that a lot.
Julian Cranberry, I'm still learning too. It's just that this language thing is so difficult. It's very confusing and it can be very headache. But what I did, I've used Cranberry, I've used Rafael Beto, I've used Luis Aquino Hernandez, I've used Edwin Sola, I've used South American Arawak language, I've used language of the Wahinias, I've used South American languages, I've used Zaha's dictionary book, I've used Kalinago dictionary, I've used another a Locono dictionary. I forgot his by Pat, I think his name is. I have him. I've had another 28 lessons of Locono. That one, I have that book. So there's a lot of them that I've been using. And Douglas Taylor's book, Languages of the West Indies. So all those books that I've been using, I've been trying to trace that, you know, of the languages, trying to trace them from the Tainos, you know. But yeah, I recommend all those sources because you don't want to only stick to Taino, you actually want to study other South American.
Now here's the next thing I was going to say, because I think maybe that's why the difficulty when people are exploring this area, you know, what's your opinion with people staying stuck to one area?
It's going to be difficult because it's going to confuse you. You know, you can't just stick to one area. You have to look at the language in all different angles. You know, considering, like I said before, the Tainos were claudioscopic people,
In a sense,
you know.
because, you know, in a sense, there is no, how can I say, the people are not fully speaking the language.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, you still have to keep an open mind in researching.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Since in the Caribbean, the language still exists. It's just not fluently. There's just certain words that still exist to this day.
In a sense, it's like saying it's like a broken language.
Like a broken language.
Like for example, I'll give my take. For example, like such as in PR, DR, and Puerto Rico, they still use a lot of Taino words. But you know, they use it with Spanish.
It's just that they don't know that it's a Taino
Yeah.
word. I give you a good example is when I was in Puerto Rico in January. I have a friend who lives in the mountains of Yauco, where my family are from, and I asked him a question. I said, you know, do you know any Taino words that you use that you think is Taino? You know, and he says, yeah, we say for rainbow, we say herimeru. I said herimeru, so I wrote it down. You know, so when I did my research and the Kalinagos, they say Halemalu or Herimaru. According to the Kalinago linguist Keisha, she says, yeah, they kind of missed the H, So my guess that they would say Herimaru.
Yeah. So in my opinion, right. So our peoples are still speaking the language, but they're not using the full dialect.
They're not using the full
because
dialect.
they are applying Spanish instead of with the dialect.
Yeah,
yes.
with the dialect. And that's the problem.
Yeah.
And that's why you would think that it's Spanish because they're using it as Spanish dialect.
So maybe that's why the challenge is hard to narrow down the language because we're more actively using Spanish, instead of the native dialect.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
We actually spanking what the conquistadors actually tried to pronounce their Taino words.
Yeah.
We following their
Right.
steps.
Right.
We trying to sound like them. We're not trying to sound like the Tainos.
Right.
So yeah, they using a Spanish dialect to try to pronounce these words. But when I traced that word Herimuru, Garifuna used that same exact word for rainbow. Kalinago say rainbow for that word. So it's just it's mind-boggling that the people in PR, and they say the Taino is extinct, they still use these words, and it has to be a reason why these words still exist, it has to be a reason why. It's got to be passed down from generation to generation, it has to be. So that's what I've been doing now. The language is it's not easy, it's very complex. I've just been trying to trace languages that's still being used today in PR, DR, Jamaica, whatever island in the Caribbean.
Yeah, just to say in a sense, okay, well, all right, so that perhaps they might not be using the language fully, but there's still a lot of indigenous words that people are still using in the island. So this is something that has to be clarified in this video to make the people understand that, that although, yes, you might not fully use your ancestors' expressions of communicating, but you're still using many of the words that was being applied at the time of the conquest when the Spanish arrived. So.
I will use Laura Figueroa, what she said the Tainos had to blend. It was a survival tactic to have their bloodline still running. You know what I mean? So because of that, they couldn't do it by the accent. They had to do it by breeding. You know what I mean? Right. Because it was a survival tactic.
Right.
They had to do it to survive. They had to blend in and mix.
Right.
If not, they would have been exterminated.
Right.
So yeah, and the language is still spoken to this day. It's just that a good example is that I didn't know this until just recently. That it's a possibility. I'm not saying it's a fact. But like we were talking about the word bibi, bibi could be used for mother, or it could be used for when you want to eat something. You know what I mean? So we say in Spanish for a baby bib, we say biberon.
Right.
For the baby, for the bib. So can that word probably derive from the word bibi? I don't know, but it seems likely, right? If you think about it,
Right.
But that's what I mean. It's like biberon. It's mixed with it has like a morpheme Spanish, right? And the prefix has like a Taino.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's a mixture. So that's the problem that today it's like a Taino Spanish together. They will have the first word Taino and then the last word is Spanish.
Yeah, if you can say that again, I think that's a good point to use, right? That people are using the Taino language, but it's mixed with Spanish.
It's mixed with Spanish.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point.
It's like, for example, I'm going to use my friend again. He told me for the basket, in Locono, they say haba. He says in the island, and the mountain, they say habanasta. So they use the first word, the Arawak word, and the last word nasta. So you can see that's a good example. They mix Taino and Spanish. Habanasta, and they think it's Spanish. Just by me saying it seems Spanish. Not knowing that it's a mixture of both words. But yeah, it's just that it's very confusing and it's very difficult to trace which words are Taino or not, because it's just that it's mixed with Spanish, like we were just talking about just now. That's just the problem. But yeah, if you're a beginner, I would suggest, if you want to get into language, I would suggest to to look into the words a little bit. Those books what I was just referencing, South American language, Kalinago, even some Mesoamerican languages like the Aztecs, you know. What I mean?
Look into Taino dictionaries.
Taino dictionaries, you know. Even though with those, I won't take them lightly because I don't know how those guys were tracing their words. It seems like they were only interviewing people and assuming their Taino words. You know what I mean? That's why when you buy those dictionaries, you have to be really, really careful. Not to say that all the words are not Taino. It's just that it might not be Taino. You know what I mean? It might be something maybe African. You know, you just gotta really, really pay attention to it. That's just my opinion.
Just be open-minded and research.
Yeah, exactly. Research it. Don't just assume that it's a Taino word. You know what I mean? That's it. You know, they're just recording whatever was spoken in the island. That just sounds Taino. That's it.
Right. Yeah. So let's keep it from there and just. So this is our opening segment on the Taino language. In the future there'll be more follow-ups. And we'll see you again next time. Thanks again.